Okay, now that we have covered systemic corruption, let's move on to systemic racism. In case you missed it in the news this week, according to Fox News, an agreement between the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers Union and the school district now states that white teachers will be laid off before teachers of color, regardless of their seniority. And this agreement came out, it was reached after a 2 week teacher strike that occurred last spring. And basically, the situation is saying there's not layoffs happening right now, but should layoffs be needed due to budget reasons or because when kids leave schools, some portion of that money follows the kids. So you have a lot of kids leaving schools right now for a very good reason. And that means some schools are losing money, which we applaud. Those schools should lose money because they shut down and took away kids' education for 2 years for no freaking reason. But what happens is that then sometimes schools have to downsize. So basically, they're saying if and when schools in our district have to downsize, instead of saying you've been here the longest or you've been here the shortest amount of time, or even better, saying like you have better test scores, you're a better teacher, they're going to decide these matters based on race. So if the person who's been there the least amount of time is a person of color, they'll go to the next level of seniority and look for a white person to fire. That's basically how it's going to function. Yeah, I'm dead
This
serious.
this is just a good reminder to me of that saying that's like if you become too open-minded, your brain falls out. It's like you become so woke and far left that all of a sudden you're like doing the same thing as the literal KKK white supremacists, but in reverse. Like firing people on the basis of their race or making employment decisions on the basis of skin color is wrong. That's apparently a radical sentiment now. I mean, look, this is just one union in one place, but it's like they really are this on the extremes of the woke left. They're going off into this terrain, but also like Hannah, is this not illegal? It sounds incredibly illegal to me.
Well, I want to get to that in a minute, but I'm not done. So, one, it's not just a localized thing happening because this teachers union has actually said what they're trying to do is create a nationwide model that other teachers unions can use. And in the agreement, it not only says that white teachers will be fired first, it also says that when bringing teachers back on, when making rehiring decisions, the district shall prioritize the recall of a teacher who's a member of a population underrepresented among licensed teachers in the district. And according to the agreement, they're taking these actions to make up for past racism that went the other direction. They say this will solve past discrimination by the district that disproportionately impacted the hiring of underrepresented teachers in the district as compared to the relevant labor market and the community and resulted in a lack of diversity of teachers. So basically, they're saying we are going to implement more racism to solve past racism, which is just mind blowing, like absolutely mind blowing. But back to your question, is this legal? I did some digging because I was pretty curious too. It seemed on its face just blatantly illegal based on the Civil Rights Act and just the Constitution and the 14th Amendment. So I dug in, and according to Hans Bader, who's a constitutional lawyer, he says the measure is outright unconstitutional. This is a quote from him. He says, when it comes to termination, an employer can't racially discriminate even against whites. The Third Circuit Court of Appeal ruled in 1996 in a case called Taxman versus Board of Education of Piscataway that a school district can't consider race even as a tiebreaker in deciding who to lay off, even to promote diversity, because that A, unduly trammels the white teachers' rights, and B, putting that aside, the school district couldn't consider race to promote diversity when black people weren't seriously underrepresented in its workforce as a whole. He also argued that the Third Circuit's ruling is strengthened by a 1989 Supreme Court ruling, Wygant versus Jackson Board of Education, that stated that a school district can't lay off white teachers to remedy societal discrimination against black people. So I can't think of any reason that I would push back on this. I think it's not legal.
I mean, you've got the so many laws, right? These are public schools, so you've got the Equal Protection Clause, you've got the Civil Rights Act. It's like you can't. I, what?
But I will say, and we know this, oftentimes when it comes to litigation, there are many groups on both the left and the right who will knowingly pass a law or do something like this, form an agreement that they know to be unconstitutional, that they know is illegal, for the direct purpose of trying to escalate it and get different legal precedent. So I don't know if that's their strategy. I'm really not sure, but I can't envision a way this doesn't get struck down. But that being said, I would imagine there's some kind of strategy or an intentionality here behind that decision, because otherwise, why waste your money fighting this kind of thing in court?
But aren't you glad that teachers unions have control over our kids in most schools in this country and that they're beholden to by the Democrats? Isn't this a great group of people to be not that they're all responsible for this one union, but I would be shocked if any of them are condemning it. Like, show me Randy Weingarten, the head of the biggest teachers union, condemning this. If it's out there, I'll acknowledge it, but I don't hold your breath.
Right. Well, I saw this woman I see on Twitter sometimes named Sunny Johnson. I think she's somebody who's in like the conscious black conservative movement, if I'm not mistaken. But she said the union admitted it was racist in its hiring and firing processes. This is their solution. How are you going to be mad at the racist solution, but not the racism they admitted caused the problem in the first place? To which I said, sounds like teachers unions are pretty racist and always have been. Shouldn't they just be banned? I mean, and this is a long-standing, I mean, let's be very, very candid. I have been anti-public sector unions, period, for many, many years. I think that they should be abolished. I think that basically public sector unions allow government officials to use our tax dollars against us. They use them to lobby against us. They use them to shut down dissent. They use them to curtail our representation in the actual political process at state legislatures and school boards and city councils across this country. I hate public sector unions. I hate all taxpayer-funded lobbying, and I think that it is a perversion that has led to a severe erosion of our system. So I'm just gonna like put that out there. But I do think with teachers unions, there are so many problems, right? They have such a stranglehold on the education system, on our dollars. We're spending $15,000 per kid per year on average and getting worse and worse and worse results. That money is not going to the kids. It's not going in the classroom. It's going into the union's pockets, which then get transferred over to the Democrats' pockets. It's going into the administrative pockets. As a whole, it's a corrupt scheme. And then on top of that, they had the audacity to then shut down schools, force kids into mass, force kids into separating, and led to all kinds of social anxiety, led to real severe developmental delays where kids, I've been around kids lately, they don't know how to talk to each other. It's bizarre. They don't know how to interact or play or like approach one another. They led to serious lack of educational outcomes that some kids will never be able to make up. And then they tried to use the Department of Justice and the FBI to go after parents who had the audacity to protest this kind of thing at school boards and try to label them domestic terrorists. These people are thugs, and I think this is just cherry on top. They're racist to boot, so let's get rid of them. They should be banned.
Yeah, look, I don't have a lot to disagree with there. I agree. Public sector union. I'm fine with private sector unions as long as they're strictly voluntary. But the public sector unions, the very concept is problematic. And I think, I mean, you can even go back to, who was it? Was it JFK who agreed with us on this? But not too long.
It was FDR.
It was FDR. Yes, FDR. His one good take of his entire life.
Yes, it's one good take that we agree on. I can't remember. I think I wrote about that for Fee years ago. But yeah, he actually agreed with us that public sector unions were a real perversion of our system and hurt democracy and should not exist. So we agree with him on that. Now, that all being said, I'm mad at the left for the teachers unions. I'm mad at them for supporting these unions. But then I saw another kind of reaction to this news story over the past couple of days from the right that just got under my skin. I'm gonna read you one tweet that kind of encapsulates it. This is from Jesse Kelly, who's sort of a populist Republican type. And he quote tweeted Fox News' report on this story, and he said, "Man, the racism is starting to sound ... what was that word? ... systemic." And I just, listen, you're not wrong. This is systemically racist. But the fact that you can only see and acknowledge it when it finally and inevitably comes for you and people you like or people who look like you, that is infuriating to me, because these are the same people who, when I was doing criminal justice reform work and talking about the extreme amounts of systemic racism in the system, in the justice system, consistently told me that I was making it up, that it wasn't true, that racism was dead, that this was just, a total pile of hogwash. And they would never look at the stats, they'd never look at the data, and it infuriated me because it is so overt, the systemic racism in our system. And it's not just within the justice system, it is within the public school system, it is within the gun control debate. We could talk in the housing market. There's so many areas that our history of slavery and Jim Crow continue to impact, and the fact that people won't acknowledge that, I don't understand it. We know the government is corrupt. We know the government hurts people. Why, if you support limited government, would you go to bat and say it's not racist? I've always thought that was a really weird stance people took on the right, and this is the kind of thing that again, I can't stand the hypocrisy when you don't care when it's happening to other people for decades, for centuries, and now all of a sudden you can recognize it. Like, come on.
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that I've always thought the way that the left and hardcore progressives talk about systemic racism is often overblown, or I don't fully agree with it, but the concept itself is not illegitimate, and as to me has always obviously applied to things like the criminal justice system. And I think you can't go and say systemic racism doesn't exist. Then you find one example of anti-white racism and say, look, systemic racism. I mean, first of all, America is not systemically racist against white people. It's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. Now, this one union was being discriminatory against white people, and that's bad. But that does not make systemic racism, and it certainly doesn't if you're the same folks who believe systemic racism isn't real at all for black people. So I guess, look, again, this is just like a tribes thing. It's back to what we were talking about earlier. People will flip and flop their positions on various issues depending which team it's affecting right now. And that is a terrible way to approach politics with any sense of principle or integrity, because it's just, you can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think the left does use systemic racism disingenuously at times, and for more collectivist end goals than get rid of the system that's racist, right? Their solution to systemic racism makes absolutely no sense. But as a whole, like the inability of people to acknowledge it when it's not occurring to people. That
I also think they paint with too broad a brush. Like the idea that America is a racist country is a very different statement than America's criminal justice system has systemic racial discrimination embedded into it. Yep. Which one of those things is true and objectively true. And then one of those things is overly broad, ignores all the positives, ignores tremendous progress, disparages ideals that we all hold. Like, because I think the story of America is a story of taking a long time to live up to beautiful promises and principles. Whereas I think sometimes the left systemic racism crowd starts to like tarnish the idea itself, right? Yeah. Or the principles themselves, rather than say our system is flawed and discriminatory and is not living up to our ideals. They castigate the very ideals themselves. And that's why I'm not on board with that movement.
Yeah. Well, to be clear, they hate our founding principles. They hate our ideas. They hate capitalism. They hate individualism. Like, of course, that is 110% accurate. So no pushback from me there. The last thing I want to bring up here is, we continue to talk about how the outcomes from public schools are getting worse and worse and worse, and they are. And I think that you can point to decisions like this as one of those reasons. When we look at even how they are making staffing decisions, and I experienced this, my mom taught in the public school system for a very brief period of time because she hated it and it was terrible. They very rarely look to promote good teachers, look to promote people who are teaching creativity, or like even people who are producing the best test scores. And instead, there's a ton of nepotism. There's a ton of hiring decisions that are being made based off criteria like this presented by this union. And I think that's why your kids can't read and write ultimately, right? Like they're not actually looking at what is best for the kids, who are the best teachers, how do we make sure that more teachers like that get hired. That has little to do with how they're making decisions in the classroom. And I just find that to be such a slap in the face, and no wonder we don't have good people going into this profession.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is not how we shouldn't be making hiring decisions on the basis of race. We should be making them on the basis, or seniority. We should be making them on the basis of merit. That's a radical thought, but